Hi everyone, Perez here, branding for the people, and welcome to my next interview series. I have a very interesting and special guest on for today, and his name is Michael O'Neill. I'll tell you a little bit more about him. But Michael and I met about a year ago in San Diego. We immediately connected. We have a lot of mutual friends in common, and I certainly admire and respect what Michael does and who he is as a human being, but also as a head honcho, as a podcaster, if you will. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about today is, we've been talking a lot about branding and the importance of it and how sort of we're approaching branding at Branding for the People. But one of the things that I know that is also important in helping to drive business and create awareness of who you are is through building a podcast. So I'm excited to have Michael here to kind of share his knowledge and insights on building your brand via podcast. So let me give you his proper introduction. So Michael, born in Toledo, Ohio, and is currently a resident of San Diego. Like I just mentioned, we met in San Diego. Michael O'Neill's grammar school report card always read, "Doesn't live up to his full potential," and talks too much. So that's actually kind of interesting for our conversation today. So we'll probably hear a lot of him talking as he gets ready and primes his interview voice with some water. So one of those pieces of feedback would come in handy as he is now the founder and the host of the award-winning and much acclaimed business and entertainment podcast called the Solopreneur Hour with Michael O'Neill. And I've actually had the opportunity of being a guest on his podcast. It's awesome. Definitely go check that out. The show, which is in a scant 13 months, has already garnered more than 2 million downloads and monetized over $200,000. Features lively and highly engaging conversations between him and his various and often sought after guests. So they all have remarkable stories, advice, and practical tips for an audience that badges itself as proudly employable. So
proudly unemployable.
Sorry,
that's the whole tag there.
I just messed up the entire brand positioning. Proudly unemployable. That's the most important piece to kind of walk away with. So, anyway, so
that's plenty. That's plenty.
So let's just jump right in. So, Michael, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Ree, it's great to be here. I'm psyched to actually just have a conversation with you on or off the camera.
That's right. Well, you and I obviously share a lot of similar passions as it relates to branding per se, and obviously we appreciate good branding and good design and whatnot. So you and I connected, and I said, well, it's always good to get another perspective, and for the people who listen to these interviews and people who are in my community is that to always get another perspective on branding. So welcome. Why don't I start with this first question, just for you to kind of introduce yourself beyond what I just had communicated to everyone. Why don't you tell us about your journey and how you got to where you are right now?
That's the question I always love. I'm like, well, I can talk about drumming for 15 minutes if you want me to. I was a web designer and print designer for 18 years, I guess, before, maybe longer. Let's see. It would have been 20 now. So yeah, about 18 years before I started this weird podcast thing. But I had a lot of client interaction. Very early on, I discovered the importance of brand and messaging as it related to web and print work. I always thought of almost every piece that I put out as part of an ad campaign, even if there wasn't one. And I had to interact a lot on a brand side because I really dealt with a lot of small businesses that were, these small clients that were $2,000 to say $10,000 web, engagements, which is not a lot. You get just a small business, someone has a couple grand, they don't know better. So I would end up, because I specialized in being a bit of a generalist. I would show them not only how to get a website and put a website together for them, but then how to take all the other initiatives like mailing list and how they could run ads on this, or maybe design a uniform for their workers or something like that. So I always had a kind of an overall identity in the back of my mind when I would work with these people. And in 2004, I was hired as the creative director for a Fortune 500 company. And I realized about halfway through my tenure, which was about a year, that I was completely unemployable. I had learned way too much about. I had read too many of the books and hung around with too many of the people that were kind of successful entrepreneurs, and it's really hard to go back. It's like taking the blue pill. You take that, and there's no way to go back to regular corporate America once you've surrounded yourselves with people like you and people like our mutual friend Nick and a lot of these entrepreneurs that you see and hear on a lot of these other shows. Once you spend time with them and you see what their actual lifestyle is like, and that's not like lifestyle of the rich and famous, but it's lifestyle of time freedom and not having to worry about how much vacation time you have to go and spend time with your family and friends and go to Bali or whatever. And it's like, once you see that, there's no way that you can just go back to work for that middle manager that probably doesn't know as much as you do. So that's really in the back of my mind where the phrase unemployable came from. And since the show was launched 13 months ago, it's now, instead of this concept of job security for the unemployable, we'll get more into that, but because that's part of the brand. But has evolved. That part of the brand has evolved into the phrase proudly unemployable. So now you're not wearing that as a negative. You're really wearing it as a badge of honor. And that manifested itself, as sometimes it does, from the brand. Like, how sometimes your people pick up on certain things, and that little piece of it goes kind of viral, and then all of a sudden that becomes a primary piece of your marketing initiative, and that's what happened to me.
Fascinating story. So it's interesting because you and I both sort of share that, and kind of we've obviously dealt in the Fortune 500 space and consulted with companies. And you're right. There's something that's interesting that happens when for many people, listeners who also have that similar background, or if they don't, but there's something interesting that happens when you move from working for a bigger entity and you become an entrepreneur. And I think there's something from a values perspective, from a lifestyle perspective that you just mentioned, but also just mindset and approach to creating value in the world and being able to do it at the speed in which we do it. I think that's the exciting thing, I think, about entrepreneurship. Yeah.
I had a woman that right before I got into this world, which was about 2009, she said two things will happen. Number one, you won't understand why people have regular jobs after a while, because once you see it, it's really, you're like, wow, you could totally be doing this.
Sure.
And then in some cases, in the beneficial cases, you'll lose track of zeros. And if you can lose track of zeros, which is, we all of a sudden someone's like, well, my review's coming up in 3 months, and if I'm lucky, I'll get a $1.30 an hour raise.
Right.
And it's like, wow, because my buddy just did an affiliate launch for somebody, and he made $96,000 last Wednesday. And it's like, when you do things like that and there's throwaways. One of my very prominent podcaster friends just does a little thing when someone signs up for his mailing list. He says, hey, and get your free ebook from audible.com. So he's driving people to his mailing list. They sign up, and then when they get to the thank you page, he has like, just go get a little free ebook. He makes like $3,000 a month with that little throwaway. And that's losing track of zeros. That's just like, that would be, so how big of a difference would that be in most people's lives to have an extra $3,000 a month when they're concerned about a $1.36 raise for their review? You know what I mean? And that's the part that really can keep you up at night.
Absolutely. Well, definitely concur. It's kind of interesting in the past 4 years. Yesterday I'm in New York. I've been in New York for the summer, and I was in Midtown Manhattan. And if you've ever been to New York, then you might know.
Many times.
Yeah. So I just felt it was kind of in the heart of Midtown, where people are kind of leaving their corporate or their big sort of position. And energy-wise,
lots of power suits and briefcases.
Lots of power suits, nice outfits, and great. And But what's interesting, if you kind of look into, New York is very energetic, and there's lots of things going on. But if you just kind of get into their mode that they're in, they're kind of like they're on a treadmill. That could be one interpretation, but they're just in this zone that is very distinct from the zone that an entrepreneur is in. And I didn't quite connect with that. And it's funny because I lived that life for many, many years, and it's just I totally cannot connect to it. It's so distinct for me, that kind of lifestyle. So
yeah, that's you not understanding how they can do that anymore. That's the thing. It's you really become a bit disconnected from it.
Right. So I love this idea of being proudly unemployable, because there is something, yes, it's hard work. And I'm sure you got to where you've gotten to over the past 13 months, not by sitting around hoping that would happen. I'm sure you busted your butt to make it happen. So there's a lot of hard work, but there's also some great payoff. And it definitely sounds like you're doing that and then some. So
yeah, it's been great. I can't complain about the history. Yeah, it's been, I came armed, at least podcast wise. I came armed with a pretty solid skill set in terms of being able to do my own branding and my own messaging and launching pretty well. I knew a little bit about the gear. I have gear and microphones and things like that around, and they don't intimidate me too much because I've been a professional drummer for most of my life, so I've been around gear. So I think I had a pretty good skill set to jump into it. The good news is that if you don't have that, that's still okay. There's still plenty of people that are there to help out, and
sure.
Podcasting is getting easier now. The barrier of entry keeps getting lower. So, for better or for worse, I think that, for me, I'm pretty focused on doing it in a very sort of broadcast quality, professional type way. But if you don't have that aspiration, you just want to talk about, the latest episode of Lost or whatever, which is maybe a little dated at this point. I don't know how many listeners you get, but you can do that. And you can totally just, get your thoughts out there to the world. And even if no one listens to you in your own house, you might get hundreds or thousands of people that'll listen to you on a podcast. So that's kind of fun.
Well, it's interesting. So I want to dig a little bit deeper on that and really kind of frame it in a way that they turn into some takeaways for people as they're thinking about extending their brand onto a podcast. And maybe there's some do's and don'ts, or maybe there's some tips for, from the perspective of, sure, maybe the barrier to entry is getting easier, and next thing you know, it'll be highly saturated, right? If not already, sort of being a podcaster, if you will. So in my view, branding is just as important, and positioning and messaging and what's your unique angle, it's just as important in the podcast world. So why don't I take this question into two parts? The first one is positioning of your podcast. Now, obviously, you had a clear sort of aha moment, which got you to the Solopreneur Hour. But what recommendations or tips or advice might you give people? They're thinking about extending their brand on podcasts, and they want to look at how to position it so that they stand out from other podcasters.
So, and you're right. I did have a clear vision, although it took me about 3 months to get that vision. It was an iterative process in my brain.
Why'd you need so much time?
Pardon?
I said, why'd you need so much time?
Well, yeah, it was, who knew? It wasn't instant.
Yeah.
It was a very iterative process for me. And the day, I remember very specifically the minute that I remember that it came to me. I was on my bike, I was riding up a hill, and I was like, the Solopreneur Hour. And I ran in and I got the URL from GoDaddy, and I'm like, yes, this is it, and it took a while to really get it. But when I thought about it, I said, yes, this encapsulates everything that I want to do. It allows me to talk to people from all different walks of life that are solopreneurs. So podcasting, I would say, even to a higher level, is so the linchpin has to be a great brand position and great messaging. And here's why. So when you decide that you want to start a show, and whatever that show is, there's literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of shows on iTunes now.
Yeah.
And you're talking about, instead of someone saying, oh, I need a web designer or a branding agency to do something for me, let me look some up. And going to, like, say, the first page of Google,
yeah,
and they'll get 10 listings of different branding agencies, maybe, ask for a couple referrals or whatever. On iTunes, it's very different because you click on business podcasts and you get hundreds of podcasts at one time. Now, there's like a little top 10 list, and then there's like a little new and noteworthy list. But essentially, you're in a sea of exact size squares. And if you haven't figured out how to zag when everybody else is zigging first, which is like you said, what is my unique proposition for this show? Like, how am I going to do this in a different way? For me, I brought an industry that had a lot of sort of structured shows, which had like the same 6 questions. They bring everybody on and ask them the same 6 questions. Or it was a training. It was like this is how you do a funnel for a lead capture funnel for your affiliate thing. And they'd spend 45 minutes walking me through the process. I was like, what if I just had conversations? Now that puts the onus on the interviewer to actually provide good content and be a good host. And not everybody is cut out for that. People don't necessarily have that skill set. So that's where I differentiated myself. And I said, this is going to be an hour. I don't care about your commute time. I think it's a dumb reason to not have a show that is as long as you would like it to be. And so for me, when you do interviews, I think it's very difficult to get to the meat and potatoes of a human in less than, let's say, 30 minutes. I think they need to be 45 minutes and longer because people don't open up for a while. You got to crack them sometimes to get them to really start talking. And often that takes a half hour to get to that point. So for anybody that's starting a podcast, you have to be really, really, really clear about your avatar. And I know you guys have probably heard that a million times, but this isn't, I hear this all the time, and you probably hear it all the time as well, Ree, which is, what's your avatar? They're like, well, it's a woman, she's 21 to 43, and she does all that. And I go, whoa, wait a second. Are you telling me that you would speak to a 21-year-old woman the same way you'd speak to a 43-year-old woman? Is that what you're telling me right now? And they were like, well, no. I said, you think a 21-year-old woman and a 43-year-old woman hear the same things the same way? And they were like, no. I said, so how can that be your one avatar?
Right.
So you have to pick a person. And that doesn't mean you can't have a range, a target audience, which a lot of people have.
Sure.
And I like to use this as an example. So let's say that out there in the Hudson, Red Bull was doing their air race event. So they have these huge pylons. They have these 2 super agile race airplanes, and they race around these pylons, and it's amazing to watch. It's loud, and they've got all of their lifestyle brand all over the place, huge tents set up. It's an amazing thing. Like, it's a really a spectacle. And if you and I were walking down the river and we saw this thing going on, do you think that you'd want to stop and have a look and maybe go check it out? I'm asking.
Yes.
Yeah, because I would. I definitely would. So I'd go and I'd pay my $12 and I'd walk in and I'd be part of the thing, and I'd probably have a hot dog and a soda or something, and I would really enjoy the experience. However, if you think that you or I have ever graced the whiteboard in their marketing room, then we're both crazy, because they've never thought of us before. We are not on their radar. They're talking to a 19-year-old video game skateboarder, energy drinker, with all of their messaging in their voice.
Yeah.
That's who they speak to. Now, that doesn't mean that other people can't enjoy their brand, which is what I would be doing at that point.
Right.
But they're not talking to me. So, especially with podcasts, because you are literally talking to someone, you have to be very specific about your avatar and your voice, who that is you're speaking to, because you don't need thousands of people to make a 6-figure income. You need 200 people to buy, let's say, a $500 product on something to make $100,000 a year. That's not a tremendous amount of people. But if those 200 people are laser focused on what it is you're offering, and they're very loyal, and they are totally plugged in, and they can still tell their friends and family, so now your 200 is maybe 500, but you've got 200 loyal and 500 overall, you can build an amazing life out of that. And that's why it's so important to be very, very clear about that avatar.
So Well said. And you're right. I get this question quite a bit, or I bring this up quite a bit because I always say, starting with who are you targeting, right? I'd be interested to kind of get your perspective. I know I've answered this question in interviews as well, but it's always good to get another perspective. But someone might be asking, well, how do I go and figure out who my avatar is? Not the target audience, but I like to call it an avatar, or like a personification of a composite character person that you're targeting, right? Same difference, but someone might be asking, how do I figure out that avatar?
Yeah.
How do you approach that, or how might you recommend someone approaching that?
I think it's a great question. I think that if your intention for your show, and this all it all ties in together. It's kind of a catch-22 in some cases, but
Sure.
if you know what it is you're trying to offer first, it's generally, if you're offering the right thing, it's because it's something that's very directly related to something that you are passionate about. So let's say, I have a vintage sports car that I've restored. I could totally do a podcast for that community and be totally laser dialed into that community,
Yeah.
because I am that community.
Yeah.
I know exactly what the problems are and what people need to overcome, and what the work is involved, and how to get insurance for it, and what happens when you race it. I know all that stuff because I'm deeply involved in it. So I think the first thing to do is to think about, what's your intention for this? If you think you're going to go out and just create a podcast just to build an audience and make money, then, and you're going to pick a niche, it drives me nuts when someone goes, yeah, just pick a niche that you can make money in. I'm like, no, you have to pick something that you actually know about and that you can speak to and be passionate about, because people can smell a fake from a mile away. So I can't just do a show on underwater basket weaving because I don't know anything about underwater basket weaving.
Right.
So first of all, you have to decide to do something that you are very intimately familiar with. And the second part is, when you do that, you'll realize that your avatar for that show is probably you, or probably someone who's very close to you. If it's not you, let's say you have a sick parent and you've been dealing with a sick parent for a long time, well, you could either be talking to the kids of the sick parents, or you could be talking to the sick parents themselves. Either way, you have a pretty intimate knowledge of who you're speaking to.
Yeah.
So I think you really have to define who it is you're speaking to based on what the subject matter is you're going to speak about. And if you don't know your S, if you will, you probably shouldn't be doing a show on it, right? So for me, my avatar was myself, and now it's a little bit expanded, but it's mostly myself is who I chose. I'll bet you that's the case. I don't know how you've found it, but I bet you picking an avatar close to home is probably in the high 70, 80, 90%.
I think that's about right. That's definitely about right, because sort of the word that I like to use in terms of is credibility. So what makes you a credible resource or person to be able to provide a service or product or resource or offering for this target audience? And so you're right. It kind of answered, I've had a very similar answer to what you just provided, is kind of look at yourself potentially as a target audience, because one, you'll be a credible person to be able to speak to other people who are like you, who are dealing with the same sort of issues or problems, and then specifically people that you've a group of people who have a set of problems that you've solved and overcome, right? That creates instant credibility for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And if you can do that and focus on a pretty specific niche, I think you can really grow a very targeted and very loyal group to follow whatever it is you have to offer down the road.
Okay.
Because once they realize that you're the real deal, and then you do come out with coaching or a lesson, if you came out with a 10-step course on branding yourself and it costs $1,200 or something, but people listen to you enough and they go, yeah, this guy totally knows what he's talking about. I'm going to listen. I'm going to buy whatever he has. That's how people can build businesses out of this.
That's right. Okay, great. So that's so we were talking about, so the higher level question was sort of, how does one go start about, they're thinking about building a podcast. Love that you brought in understanding who your avatar is, understanding who your target audience is. Is there what other things that they should be thinking about in terms of positioning that podcast?
Yeah, I mean, there's the actual physical positioning, which is where do you put it on iTunes? So there are certain sections of iTunes, like right now, the business section is being overwhelmed with everyone starting an entrepreneur podcast.
Sure.
There's a lot of other fertile ground within iTunes. So if you do have a couple of different hobbies, maybe I could do a show on drumming versus entrepreneurship or, whatever. And there's probably more space there for me to jump out a little bit.
Okay.
But then the position itself, one thing I like to have people do is I want someone to have a complete understanding of what they're about to get when they see your podcast artwork. So when they first saw mine, it said the Solopreneur Hour, job security for the unemployable. So first that word unemployable would kind of pick them up. And they go, oh, that's pretty interesting. I've not heard that word before quite like that.
It's almost like a pattern, and then they know isn't it?
Yeah, they know they're getting an hour, so they know that's what's going to happen for the show. And then what's the solopreneur mean? Like, tell me about that. I feel like maybe I'm a solopreneur. I'm a real estate agent, so I'm really in charge of my own destiny. So maybe I should listen to the show. So they have a really a fairly clear idea. And since then, I've done not a rebrand, but a refresh of the brand, which is based on that particular notion that people really picked up on unemployable. Mm-hmm. I started with this concept of, now it says the Solopreneur Hour with Michael O'Neill because I wanted to bring my name into it. Then it says candid insights, lively conversations with the proudly unemployable. So now it really summarizes exactly what they're going to get in that hour.
Yeah.
And I want that for everybody's versus the Michael O'Neill show, because who cares or who am I and what are they getting out of the deal?
Sure.
So I do like to have that be really, that's why you gotta really have to nail the brand and identity part first. But once you do that, you can what I like to do when I start shows for other people or even on my own is I would take a picture of the iTunes window with all of the different shows in it, and I would take my artwork and make it really small. I would shrink that window down, and I'd stick my artwork there, and I would say, I'll squint my eyes a bit and go, did this stand out?
Does it pop?
Is this something does it pop on the page? And if it didn't, I would redesign. In fact, I started with a black background with yellow copy, and I switched it to yellow, black on yellow, and it's obviously colossally different once that's there. So, yeah. So that was the basic gist is positioning it in a way that, first of all, people can see it, so the artwork is right, and then also that they understand what they're getting from this moment of time they're about to spend with you, and then also picking a spot within iTunes that you think that you can kind of establish an identity without tons of noise around you.
Okay, great. I think there's some awesome tips, right? Obviously, people from a visual perspective, they need to see it so it pops or stands out or it sort of breaks through the clutter, that people understand in a very short moment's notice of what they're going to be getting out of this podcast. And obviously, you brilliantly sort of branded yours so that people know what they're going to get in that hour. And you're very clear, right? You have your little T-shirt there. He's probably going to go and get that.
They're all there. The brand is always surrounding me.
It's always surrounding you. And
here's the logo.
The Solopreneur. Yep, the Solopreneur. Is that on a Frisbee?
It's not. A listener sent this to me.
That's nice. Job security for the unemployable.
Yeah, that was sort of the first iteration of it, and the subtlety of this is my little guy, my little solopreneur, who's the orange dot. And he's breaking away from the 9 to 5, and you see the 1 hour. So I'm again subliminally letting him know there's an hour. But my little orange guy is breaking away from this very thick clock. It's like a thick bordered clock, and he's on his way. He's on his way to time freedom and financial freedom and location freedom.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, that's what I did. Yeah.
Love that. So that was great. A great example in terms of how to have your visuals sort of stand out, and obviously you're good at that because you're a creative director. People need to understand it, and then also pick a spot. This might be more interesting for some people in terms of what categories they should be in within the realm of the topics within the iTunes. Okay.
And you can use those to help you decide if you are torn between a couple of different ideas. If you are, I want to do vintage cars and I want to do drums or whatever. See what the competition is like. Look at what they're doing and listen to their shows. And I will say that I will give this as a tip. Don't use podcasting as your barometer of how a show should flow and how it should sound. Because as you know, being a designer, 99% of designers are awful. There's 99% of designers are awful. There's a few designers that are really, really brilliant. You go, yeah, and those are the ones that are probably working, right? But when you go to small town Charlie and he goes, yeah, I've made $80,000 and with this web design business, and you look at his portfolio, you go, how on earth has this happened? But that's what happens when you're in certain markets and you can just kind of get away with whatever. Now, podcasting has brought all of those people into equality. So know that when people start their janky sounding shows and they don't have the right gear and they don't know how to introduce people, they don't know how to conduct interviews, they don't know how to do any of this stuff, it reflects poorly on the entire industry, as does bad design on the design industry. So when you're looking for inspiration on how to really do a show, go to the big guns. Look at what NPR is doing. Go to Here's the Thing, WNYC with Alec Baldwin. I mean, listen to the shows that are really professionally done and let that be your barometer of how you're gonna build this thing and what you want it to sound like and how you want it to flow. Because if you do that, that is a major differentiating factor for a podcast right now, because most people are bad at it.
Okay. So here's a question that I don't know that people, it's clear for them, but how does one make money off of a podcast? How do you monetize that?
There's a pretty clear monetization path to podcasting. The first phase, when you first start and you don't have any audience at all, you can still pretend like you do. You can still practice like you do. And to do that, you can get what's called an affiliate link from any number of companies. So let's take Bluehost. They're a web hosting company. And if someone signs up for a hosting account, you get $65 to, I think, $150, depending on what level of affiliate you are. So what you can do is say, hey, this episode's brought to you by Bluehost, the number one web hosting company, and blah, blah, blah. To get your hosting account, you go to solopreneurhour.com/Bluehost. And if anybody clicks on that link, I get $65 or whatever it is, right? Don't click on that link. I don't think it exists. But that's the first way to start. And anybody can sign up for an affiliate link. You can go to websites like Mission Junction or JVZoo, and you can pick a product that you use already, which is great. You have a piece of software that you use that you like, and they can sort of sponsor your show. So that's step one. Step two is, once you start doing this for a while, you'll find that you're going to start getting some emails from people. As your audience builds, they're going to be like, hey, well, how do I do this, this, this? And how do I do this, this, this? At that point, you can start thinking about, all right, what if I had a little group coaching program around my topic, or a group XYZ? I mean, if it's a pure entertainment show, it's going to be harder to do this step. But if you do have something where you're actually involved in, I could do it for drumming. I could do it for, vintage cars. I could build a group around those things fairly easily. And so if that's the case, then what I like to do is, when people started doing that for me, I said, okay, click this link. We're going to schedule a 15-minute Skype interview, just a little quick thing. And I'm going to find out what it is you want out of a kind of a coaching program. I did that for 40 people. And I ended up launching my solo lab on December 5th of last year. And Solo Lab now has about 70 people in it, and they pay $500 a quarter to be part of this group coaching program.
Yep.
So that's sort of phase 2.
Yep.
Phase 3 was, once you get some really motivated people in that group, you can actually do private coaching with them. And that's something that was inspired by our friend Nick Unsworth. He said, you've got these people that some people want to fast track. So just do a private coaching program and they can be in your program. And so I did that. And then finally, when the downloads started coming, and I typically say that once you get to about 2,000 downloads a day for your show, so you're somewhere between 40 and 60,000 a month, which is these days not all that difficult because podcasting is really starting to grow. Then you can start looking at doing actual ads for people. So instead of me sort of looking for an affiliate sale from Bluehost, they might come to me and say, hey, we'll pay you $2,000 a month for six live reads on your show. And I'll say, okay, and I'll do a little 15-second pre-roll. Hey, this episode's brought to you by Bluehost. And then I'll do a 60-second ad in the middle of the show. And for that, they will pay me X amount of dollars.
Okay.
And so right now...
Oops, you're kind of cutting it out there. There you go.
That's where I am as far as monetization. The next phase of that being, I'm starting to see some... I was going to say the next phase of that being that I think public speaking is probably the next evolution from that.
Okay.
But certainly you can put out any of your own programs and any of your own coaching.
Sure. No, I totally get it. So affiliate links, getting emails from people to maybe do some, getting them to an interview to maybe work with them, private coaching, advertising, and then maybe eventually getting requests for public speaking.
Yeah, that's pretty solid summary.
Okay, cool. All right, well, there's definitely a lot here. I have a sort of question to ask you. How do you decide what criteria you use to bring on the guest for a show? The converse to that is, how do you decide which podcast because I get hit up all the time for people who want me to be on their podcast, right? How does one decide to participate in one or not? And maybe there are two different answers, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, there's two answers.
Yeah.
I pretty much say yes to everybody, but I'm pretty specific about when I can. I'm on other people's shows on Thursdays. Like we're recording this on a Thursday. And I have 5 to do today. And I do that with, I use a program called Schedule Once. And some people use one, I think it's called Time Trade.
Well, besides the technical piece of setting that up, but is...
I'm getting there. Hold on. Hold your horses. So what I do with that is I'll send it out, and if people will agree to that, then I'll be on anybody's show. I'm fine with that. And I will just be a guest because I have found that the more doors that are open, the more people that end up finding my show. So I'm okay with that. I feel like that's almost advertising. It's almost part of the deal. As far as bringing guests onto my show, I would say that I mostly hand vet them. I get 10 requests a week to be on the show. They're mostly from authors, speakers, because they have a new book that's out. And I'm fairly disinterested in those. I do find that when you do those, every other phrase is, well, in the book. And I'm like, I get it. You wrote a book. It's cool. But I like to find out a lot of sort of interesting things about people. And so mine doesn't end up being promo fest. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll look... If they write to me, I'll instantly go and check them out on their social media profile and see what they've done, see what their Twitter following is like, see what their Facebook following is like, see if they're actually interacting and engaging with their audience, because that's the kind of guest I want.
Okay.
I don't want one that's just into total self-promotion the whole time. So that's mostly my vetting process. And sometimes I don't bring people on that have huge, audiences, but are interesting people. And I do look for people that are very interesting solopreneurs within sort of these target niches. Great. Like I just had a guy on that has been traveling the world for 7 years and has turned into this amazing photographer. And I don't know it turns out he actually has a big audience, but even if he didn't, it didn't matter. I was like, I really want to learn about this guy, how he's built a career out of this. So yeah, cool. That's what I do.
And obviously interesting people will create for an interesting discussion. And then of course people are engaged and they get great value from your show. So
yeah, that's right.
Okay, lots of great nuggets here and tips in terms of someone looking at building their brand via a podcast. Lots of great resources. So, Michael, if someone wanted to find out a little bit more about you, where should we send them to?
Everything for me is at Solo Hour. So Solo Hour on Twitter, solohour.com, because no one can spell preneur. So I decided just to make it nice and short for people. So yes, Solo Hour on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, blah, blah, blah. It's all
Everywhere.
Solo Hour. Yes. Part of the brand, baby. Brand consistency.
Brand consistency. Gotta love that. Well, from a brander to another podcaster who comes from a branding and background, definitely appreciate the level of consistency there. So go check out Michael O'Neill at Solo Hour across all social media platforms, apparently. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and whatnot. So,
website. Yeah, the whole bit.
The whole bit. And then I don't know what it takes for us to be able to get one of those T-shirts in the background there, but they look nice. They make for a great display. But go
what I do, and that could be a little interesting for your people, is for every major event I go to, I print 25 to 30 of them. So they're super limited edition. You can't see this, but on the back of one of these, it says WDS 2014. It's a very specific to that event. And my agreement is, on day one of the event, I walk around and I hand them out only to people that will wear them at some point during the event. So I want to see these shirts, if it's Friday, I want to see 20 of them on Sunday walking around. And people going, oh, I saw that shirt. I saw that shirt. So it's a way for me to kind of be viral within a one event. So that's and then my logo and stuff is on the back, obviously. And each one of them has a phrase, So the blue ones, which isn't on the wall, says proudly unemployable. This one is I am unemployable. This one is I think we're Facebook friends. Right. Because every time you go to an event, we're like, yeah, I think we're Facebook friends, aren't we? That. So yeah, that's where that came from.
I like that. I think we're Facebook friends, right, Michael?
Yeah, we are indeed.
Okay, good. Well, so there you have it. More about Michael O'Neill. And, obviously I want to thank you for participating in this. I know it's not quite a podcast, but I do think that the people who are following our work and what we're doing at Branding for the People would get tremendous value, because I don't touch podcasting. I don't teach it. I don't even have a podcast, but I do know that there are some people that this is part of their model. This is part of how they want to get their awareness out there, how they want to build revenue. And so bringing on an expert such as yourself is highly useful. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, if anybody wants to learn to launch a podcast, please find me on one of those social media platforms. And I have a great little group for you.
Awesome. Well, definitely go check that out. Thank you. And then do me a favor, for those of you listening in, you'll just leave a comment and let us know what you got from this, if it was valuable, and if there's anything that you've the whole finger pointing is if there's anything that you would like to share in terms of what you got out of this interview. So thank you, Michael. Good to chat with you, and I look forward to seeing you in San Diego really soon. For everyone else, have an awesome day, and I'll speak with you guys soon.